Hi, I'm Lael Wilcox. I grew up in Alaska, and this summer I'm turning 40, and I'm taking on the biggest project of my life. So this summer I will attempt to break the Guinness World Record for riding around the world. So that's a minimum of 18,000 miles. And to break the record, I have to finish in 78 days. And quick rundown for that is I have to ride 16 hours a day at 15 miles an hour and do that day after day for 78 days and then I'll break the record. I didn't really grow up riding bikes. A little background on me, I got my first bike when I was 10. I was so excited about it, and then uh, within 3 weeks, somebody stole my bike, and I was so disappointed. Actually, so crushed that I didn't really get on a bike again until I was in college, and even then, I was pretty resistant. I would walk or run everywhere. I've never owned a car. I've never wanted to drive, and that was my basic transportation. And then I got a job that was 4 miles from where I lived, so I started borrowing bikes to get to and from work, just because it took too long otherwise. And then I realized it was really hard, but it was also really efficient. And then as the days went on, it actually became kind of fun. And I thought, oh, there's something to this. And I actually went and bought my first bike. It was fixed gear, $500. I thought it was the nicest bike in the world. And I rode it until the crank fell off. Uh, and I started taking it everywhere, all over town. And then I was in school in Tacoma, Washington, and I wanted to visit my sisters that were living in Seattle at the time. And generally, I took the bus, and it was $2.50 straight shot Tacoma to Seattle. Usually, throw my bike on the bus. But this weekend, I was just really cash poor, and I didn't have the money to take the bus. And then I thought, well, I don't want to miss them. And I thought, well, what if I could ride my bike there? So I went to the school library. I printed out a stack of directions, turn by turn, how to get there using bike paths. And it was like 50 miles. And I thought, oh my God, I don't know if I can do this. But I thought, wow, let's give it a go. What's the worst that could happen? I make it 15 miles and then I turn back and get home somehow. And then it was during this ride, I was getting farther and farther from home. And I thought, well, if I could ride to the next city, I could ride across the country. And it seemed so clear and simple. I thought, it'll be 50 miles a day, day after day. And eventually, if I connect the dots, then I'll get somewhere far. So, this idea kind of overtook me. And within 2 months, I was set. I'd gotten out of school, I'd saved a little bit of money, and I packed, a tent, sleeping bag, and started making the trip. And I thought, oh, this will just be a one-off. And I'll do this bike trip and then I'll go to med school and I'll become a doctor. And then it didn't turn out like that at all. I did this trip and I was just fascinated. And I spent the next 7 years spending half the year working, saving money at odd jobs, restaurants, bike shops, this kind of thing. And then the other half of the year traveling the world. And first it was in the US and Canada, then down to Mexico, then over to Europe. Then I went to Africa and then into the Middle East. And it was this really cool, kind of simple, low cost lifestyle. And I loved it. I loved all I got to see. I loved the interactions I was making. And I ended up on this at the end of a 10-month trip. I was in Israel, and I was riding this bikepacking route, and this new sport had kind of sprung up where people were designing routes all over the world to kind of showcase their home countries. And so this route was 850 miles mountain biking, and I had loved touring it so much that I thought, oh, I'll still be in the country when the race happens. I wonder what that would be like. So then I show up to the race. I'm on my, $400 used touring bike, cotton t-shirt, platform pedals, running shoes. I'm the only woman out of 40 starters. And these guys looked at me and they were like, are you going to make it through the first day? And then I got so fired up and indignant. I was like, of course I'm going to make it through the first day. And, I started riding as hard as I could. And then by the end of the first day, I was, in the lead, and the next guy behind me was 25 miles back. And I was like, I got this. I slept in the side of the road for 3 hours. I got up and started climbing the next mountain. And and I loved it. I thought, this is really so much fun. It's so exhilarating to kind of race like this, to push my limits, to see places and to have zero plan. I didn't know where I'd end up. I didn't know what things would look like, but all I knew was I just had to find food and water and keep going. And the kind of fascinating thing about this race was people started coming out to find me because I have this spot tracker. It shows my location every 5 to 15 minutes. And there's this one woman in this race leading the field. And these people thought, is she real? And these women would come out and with tears in their eyes because I didn't really know this, but uh, in Israel at the time with the culture, women just weren't really athletes. They were thought of as equals intellectually and they could do all these things, but they just didn't compete. So it really meant something. And I even, like, to an extreme, heard there were online chats asking if I was a genetic mutation because I was a woman. I don't know, I was capable of doing these things. And I thought, well, this is kind of questioning what we think is possible. And at the same time, I was like, I love this. I love how fired up I get. I love how exciting it is. I love pushing myself. So it set me off onto this trajectory for the next 10 years of mixing in ultra distance races with my tours and my work. And the first big one was going down for the Tour Divide, which is this mountain bike race that goes from Canada to Mexico. In that first year that I did it, I actually rode to the start from home in Alaska. So I did this huge long distance 2,100-mile tour just to get to the start line, took a week off, and then raced from Banff down to the New Mexican border. And yeah, I had bought my own first new nice bike, and I ended up breaking the women's record, and I just had the greatest time. I really, really loved it. So I thought, well, what else can I do? And the next summer I set out to race the Trans Am, and that's a road race that goes from Oregon to Virginia across the country. A little bit longer, and also through so many places I'd never been. And in the end, I won overall, and I thought this sport is amazing that women and men start together and then really race each other. And it's so rare in athletics to get to do this. There's always the women's field and the men's field, but here it's just kind of a free for all. Another huge piece of it was there's no entry fee, there's no prize money, there's no support along the way. So people are just out there just to see what they can do. And anybody's welcome. And I thought, well, how cool. And I never would have gone if I didn't have this low barrier to entry. And I mean, I gave it everything I had. And, I was paying for this from working at restaurants, and that was tough. And I think about 3 years later, I started getting help from different bike companies saying, we love what you're doing and we want to support this. So I could start doing it more full time, which was a huge transition. I'm so grateful that I get to do this as a job. It's incredible. So then I would, after these big rides, go back home to Alaska where I grew up. And this one summer, I spent the whole summer riding every road in the state. And this wasn't a competition. It was just to see what was out there. And I loved it so much. It was so open-ended. I didn't really have daily goals of where I was going to get. And it just felt like ultimate freedom. Around this time too, I started this girls mentorship program called Anchorage Grit, where we get 12 and 13-year-old girls on bikes. Most of them know how to ride, but they've never ridden more than like 2 miles. And we ride together with female mentors for 6 weeks, leading up to this final 3-day, 60-mile camp out. And it's been so cool to see those kids gain confidence, come out of their shells, make friends with each other, and also see the bike as both a way to see the world, but real transportation, and a way to kind of feel good in their bodies. This is also an age where a lot of girls stop doing sports. In biking, this is funny, but I grew up not even thinking it was a sport. It's a way to get around. It was a way to be outside, and it is all of those things at the same time, which I think is really incredible. It's like the more I do it, the more kind of aspects of the whole thing I see. So At the time, I was doing the girls' mentorship programs. I also started women's adventure scholarships, where a couple of them were like, design your own 1,000-mile route in Alaska. Tell me what you need to make it happen. I'll give you a bike, camping equipment, travel stipend. And I got like, 200 applicants, the age range of 14 to 76 years old. Reading all these women's stories was incredible. And then, given the opportunity to three of the riders in the end to get to do these things, yeah, it was just so cool. And then off the back of that, we started the women's bike packing rallies. So this was more getting community together. So we'd establish like a 500-mile kind of mixed terrain route, and then open up applications. The event's free. We have room for 50 to 70 women, and then they all start together and kind of leapfrog each other and try to make it to the finishers party at the end. In next month, we'll have our 11th women's rally in Sardinia, and these have happened all over the world, and it's created this incredible network of women bike packers who have started their own events, podcasts, races, all of these things to kind of grow the sport. And the cool thing is I've really seen it grow, from when I started being the only woman. Now it's like I see them everywhere. And we share this kind of special connection, as you do with all bike packers. We're all people on bikes, to put it simply, is you're all doing the same thing. Anyway, these projects, these rides, these races all culminated in going after the women's around the world record in 2024. And this was, I thought, this would be the biggest project of my life. And this again is a minimum of 18,000 miles. And you make your own route, you connect continents with commercial travel. And I thought, well, let's make this as special as we can. Let's route through all the major cities. Let's go over extra mountain passes. Let's go to places I've never ridden. And to keep logistics simple, I carried what I needed on the bike: sleeping equipment, tools. I took care of my own bike. I figured I'd find food and water and places to stay along the way. The only thing I really planned was the route, just to have kind of hit that specific number. And this was the most fun project of my life. I loved it so much. And about a month out from setting out, I decided what would really make this special is if I invited the public to ride with me. So I put out a statement: people can ride with me for any stretch, for as long as they want, on any bike. And they would come out all the time. And it was never planned. They just follow the tracker and pop out on the side of the road, or form a group in a city and join me. And this was so, so much fun because it was so unexpected. I'd see families on e-bikes. People would come and they'd say, I'm going to join you for the whole day. It'll be my biggest day of riding for my life. And they tell me their stories, where they're from, or that, I was passing through their hometowns and how special that was. And it really brought life into this ride. I had the best time. I finished in Chicago. My folks were there, and, I just thought, it doesn't get any better than this. And my wife, Rue, had been along for the trip to document my ride. We made a daily podcast sharing stories from the road. She filmed photos and videos. And in the end, she made a 90-minute full feature film called Lael Rides Around the World. And then last spring, we went on a screening tour to kind of promote the film. So we had 12 different screenings in different locations all over the world. And that meant I watched the movie 12 times. And I thought, I loved it. My brother made the music. I remembered how pretty it was, but I also noticed how often I stopped. And I was like, oh my God, if I didn't stop all the time and talk all the time, I could have ridden so much faster. So I kind of set the intention, I think last summer, probably around the London screening, that next summer I'll go after the men's record. And the whole point of this is, while that ride was incredible and so full of heart and full of life, I feel like it didn't really represent my athletic ability, what I can do on the bike. And that's been such a big piece of the sport for me, and it's not like discounting the experience. It's just kind of the effort and the focus and the drive. And so this summer, I'm going to try to break the men's record, which is 78 and a half days. And that is 30 days faster than I rode last time. But when you break down the numbers of that, from what I rode last time, I was 12 hours a day on the bike, 12 hours off, and I rode 15 miles an hour. So this next summer, I just have to spend 4 more hours a day on the bike. And last time I was carrying my own stuff, and this time I'll have a support crew. So people to take care of my bike, and then I don't have to carry my layers and all the other things I need. And just the whole point is to make it more of an efficient ride. So it's a lot. And I think about this and I think, well, why do it again? When the first time was so great, and um, why do it when it's so expensive or it's so complicated to set up the logistics, or it's, so all consuming? And then I think, well, we're still at a point where people don't think women can do these things. And it's not just me. I don't think I'm the only woman that can do this, but I do think that when I do these things, and I found this through my whole career, um, people kind of look at that and they say, if she can try so hard, maybe I can too. And they take on their own goals, or they share their own pursuits, or what they've been going through, and how kind of taking on a challenge or riding a bike has made a difference. And I think I got to give it a go. And I think also, even if it doesn't work out, and for so many reasons this can fall apart, and I don't get the record, I think, well, it's pretty cool that I got to even try. In a world where there's so many things happening, there's so many problems, doing a bike ride is extra. It's not essential to life, but it brings life to so many things, and it makes me so excited about things and connecting places. And then ultimately, it's a bike ride, and I'll always have that. And it's the year to do it. I'm not getting any younger, but I have been training super hard. And next week I'll set out on a test run riding 1,500 miles from home in Tucson, Arizona to Austin, Texas. I'll have part of my crew there, and we can kind of work out systems that'll work along the way. I'll be riding 230 to 250 miles a day, and this will be a great training block. And then we're getting set up for the summer. So just feel super grateful that I've gotten to do all this on the bike, and I don't think I'll ever get sick of it. Just love being out there. It never gets old, never gets boring, and there's always a different angle to it. So it's been great. Thanks for having me.